Hello students, welcome to British Columbia, the language school. In our new playlist all about ICSC and ISC English, we will do line by line explanation of our first chapter from the new book Prism, which is a collection of ISC short stories, means it is for classes 11 and 12. So without any delay, let us come to the chapter. So your first chapter is A Living God by Lafcadio Hearn. But before we begin the explanation, let us read something about the author. So, the author's full name is Patrick Lafcadio Hearn, but he was also known by his Japanese name Koizumi Yakumo, because he spent most of his time, in fact his later years, he spent in Japan and also adopted the citizenship, and then he got this name Koizumi Yakumo. He also studies Japanese culture and he was having in-depth knowledge about Japanese culture and also adopted the Japanese way of life sincerely. So this present short story is also an excerpt from his famous book Gleanings in Buddha Fields. I have already highlighted the important points about the author, and now let us come to the last paragraph, which is very important because it tells the summary of the story. So let's read. Hearn's A Living God tells the story of tsunami affecting village of farmers along the Japanese coast. So, the very opening line of this paragraph tells us the setting of the story. So, what is the setting of the story? A village along the Japanese coast. A rich farmer, Hamaguchi Gohei, saves his people by setting his precious crops on fire so they can see the smoke and hurry to a safe place. So, Hamaguchi Gohei is the main character of this story, who saves his people by setting his crops on fire. His grandson thought that he had become mad, but Hamaguchi paid no attention as his plan was successful and he had saved the villages. So he did not care for what his grandson was saying or what he was thinking. The influential resident of the village, living in a farmhouse virtually disconnected from his people, is now the god that lives in great honor among them all. And this man who used to live in a farmhouse, virtually he was disconnected from his people, but this time after this incident he became their god. The story of Hamaguchi is an account of sacrifice, selfless action and presence of mind, and this is the theme of the story. Sacrifice, selfless action and presence of mind, which were the qualities of this man. Now let's begin the explanation of the chapter. From immemorial time, the shores of Japan have been swept at irregular intervals of centuries by enormous tidal waves. Tidal waves caused by earthquakes or by submarine volcanic action. So from very long time, the Japanese shores have often been wiped out by enormous tidal waves at irregular intervals, means every now and then they were wiped out. These tidal waves were either caused by the earthquakes or by submarine volcanic action. As we know that Japan is prone to earthquakes and such volcanic activities. So these awful sudden risings of the sea are called by the Japanese tsunami. So these tidal waves, which were very giant and very huge, and they were known as tsunami by the Japanese. The name was given to this giant wave as tsunami. The last one occurred on the evening of June 17, 1896, when a wave nearly 200 miles long struck the northeastern provinces of Miyagi, Iwate and Aomori, wrecking scores of towns and villages, ruining whole districts and destroying nearly 30,000 human lives. So before writing this short story, the writer remembers one giant wave, that tsunami, which occurred in the year 1896. And this giant wave was nearly 200 miles long, which struck these provinces which are mentioned here, and it also destroyed many towns and villages, and it took nearly 30,000 human lives. So it was really destructive. The story of Hamaguchi Gohei is the story of a like calamity which happened long before the era of Meiji on another part of Japanese coast. So this story of Hamaguchi Gohei is also of one such incident which occurred before Meiji era, means which was recorded in Japanese history from the year 1868 to 1912. He was an old man at the time of occurrence that made him famous. So when this incident occurred, at that time Hamaguchi was an old man and this incident made him famous. He was the most influential resident of the village to which he belonged, and he was also the richest man of his village. He had been for many years his Murasa or headman, and he had been for many years he had been the village headman, and in Japanese the headman is known as Murasa. And he was not less liked than respected. He had both respect as well as he was both respected as well as liked by his people. The people usually called him Oji-san, which means grandfather, and out of love the people of that village called him Oji-san, means grandfather. Another Japanese word we find here. Like in our country, in West Bengal, we hear like people call each other Dada, the same word, Oji-san. But being the richest member of the community, he was sometimes officially referred to as the Choja. Here is another word, means he had 3 titles we see in this paragraph, Choja. And just because he was the richest member of the community, so in Japanese, richest member was called as Choja. He used to advise the smaller farmers about their interests, to arbitrate their disputes, to advance them money at need, and to dispose of their rice for them on the best terms possible. So why he was liked so much by his people? Because every now and then he used to advise small farmers about how can they settle their interests and how can they settle their disputes, and also whenever they needed, he used to give them money. He used to help them with money and to dispose of their rice for them on the best term possible. And also sometimes he used to buy their rice in order to give them some profit. So in this paragraph we get to know who was Hamaguchi Gohei and why he was liked by his people. So this story is in fact based on a real incident. So we can say it was a real story which was narrated by the writer himself. Hamaguchi's big thatched farmhouse stood at the verge of a small plateau overlooking a bay. So this is the location of his farmhouse where he used to live. Means it was at the verge of a small plateau from where one could see the bay. The plateau, mostly devoted to rice culture, was hemmed in on 3 sides by thickly wooded summits. Means the plateau was developed by the rice farming society. Devoted to rice culture means it was developed by the rice farming societies. Means the main paddy was the main crop there, which was grown, was hemmed in on 3 sides by thickly wooded summits, and it was surrounded from 3 sides. It was surrounded by thickly wooded summits that you can see in the image here. From its outer verge, the land sloped down in a huge green concavity as if scooped out to the edge of the water, and the whole of the slope, some 3/4 of a mile long, was so terraced as to look, when viewed from the open sea, like an enormous flight of green steps divided in the center by a narrow white zigzag, a streak of mountain road. So here we see the description of the plateau, that from its outer margin the land was sloping down and there was a huge green field, and it appeared as if it was in a concave manner, as if it was scooped out to the edge of the water, and the whole of this slope some 3/4, and this slope was some 3/4 of a mile long, and so it looked like a terrace from the open sea, and this terrace looked like the green steps. So here there is a use of simile, divided in the center by a narrow wide zigzag, a streak of mountain road, and these steps were divided by a narrow zigzag road. 90 thatched dwellings and a Shinto temple composing the village proper stood along the curve of the bay, and other houses climbed straggling up the slope for some distance on either side of the narrow road leading to the Choja's home. And there were 90 thatched houses along with a Shinto temple, and which made a village look proper, stood along the curve of the bay, and this village stood along the curve of the bay. And the other houses, there were some other houses also at some distance on either side of the narrow road which lead to the Choja's home, means Hamaguchi's home. So till here we got to know that who was Hamaguchi Gohei and where did he live. So we get to know that he lived on top of the plateau, so from there he could overlook the bay and every other houses that were on the slope of the plateau. So let's start reading the story. One autumn evening, Hamaguchi Gohei was looking down from the balcony of his house at some preparations for merrymaking in the village below. So it was an autumn evening and Hamaguchi was looking down from his balcony and there were some merry-making preparations going on in the village. There had been a very fine rice crop, and the peasants were going to celebrate their harvest by a dance in the court of the Yujigami. So why this merry-making preparations going on? Because they were celebrating their rice crops. All the peasants, the farmers, were celebrating their rice crops. And how they were celebrating? By a dance in the court of Yujigami. Yujigami is their god in the Shinto temple. The old man could see the festival banners, nobori, fluttering above the roofs of the solitary street, the strings of paper lanterns, festooned between bamboo poles, the decorations of the shrine, and the brightly colored gathering of the young people. So the old man from his balcony could easily see the festival preparations, like there were banners which were fluttering above the roofs, and paper lanterns were also tied between the bamboo poles, and the shrine, means the temple, was also beautifully decorated, and people in their different colored dresses have gathered there to celebrate the day. He had nobody with him that evening but his little grandson, a lad of 10, the rest of the household having gone early to the village. So that evening he was all alone with his little grandson, who was just 10 years old, because the rest of the family members had already gone to the village. He would have accompanied them had he not been feeling less strong than usual, and that day he was feeling weakness, so he could not accompany his family members. The day had been oppressive, and in spite of a rising breeze, there was still in the air that sort of a heavy heat which, according to the experience of the Japanese peasant, at certain seasons precedes an earthquake. That day was destructive. And however the cool breeze was rising from the sea, but still in the air there was heavy heat. And it was an indication, according to the Japanese farmer, because they had an experience. So according to their experience, it was an indication of an upcoming earthquake. And presently, an earthquake came. It was not strong enough to frighten anybody, but Hamaguchi, who had felt hundreds of shocks in his time, thought it was queer, a long, slow, spongy motion. So as expected, the earthquake came. However, it was not so strong to frighten anybody. Means people could not be frightened with this shock because it was a very light shock. But Hamaguchi, who had the experience of many such shocks in his time, he thought it was not the usual one, but a very strange one. It was a long, slow, and spongy motion. Probably it was but the after tremor of some immense seismic action very far away, and it was assumed that very far away there had been an immense seismic action. And these tremors were the result of this activity. The house crackled and rocked gently several times, then all became still again. And because of these tremors, houses started crackling and rocking for many times, because these shocks came one after the other. But then everything became silent again, quiet again. So till here we stop, because it's a big story and it will take 2 to 3 parts to complete it, because if we continue to explain in one video, it will become very lengthy and you might get bored. So we will meet in next 2 to 3 days. I will upload another video and another part of it. Till then, take care and bye bye.